Good evening, and welcome to the Loretto Theater. Please take a moment to locate the nearest emergency exit, as marked by the red exit signs. Those with mobility issues, please proceed to the Bleecker Street lobby, where a staff member will assist you. The restrooms for both the orchestra and balcony levels are located through the double doors to your left. We ask that you please silence your cell phone and remind you that photography of any kind is not permitted. Thank you, and enjoy the performance.
My father used to come once a week from Vendrell to visit me. We would go for walks together, sometimes wandering into music shops looking for music scores, and after a few hours, he would have to go back home. The repertoire of the ensemble at the Café Pajarera was broader than the Café Tost. I continued my solos, and of course, I needed more music. One day I told my father I needed especially to find some new solo music for the Café Pajarera. Together we set off on the search. For two reasons I shall never forget that afternoon. First, my father bought me my first full-size cello. How proud I was to have that wonderful instrument. Then we stopped at an old music shop near the harbor. I began browsing through a bundle of music scores. Suddenly, I came upon a sheaf of pages, crumbled and discolored with age. They were unaccompanied suites by Johann Sebastian Bach, for the cello only. I looked at them with wonder. 6 suites for violoncello solo. What magic and mystery, I thought, were hidden in those words. I had never heard of the existence of the suites. Nobody, not even my teachers, had ever mentioned them to me. I forgot our reason for being at the shop. All I could do was stare at the pages and caress them. That scene has never grown dim. Even today, when I look at the cover of that music, I'm back again in the old musty shop with its faint smell of the sea. I hurried home, clutching the suites as if they were the crown jewels, and once in my room, I pored over them. I read and reread them. I was 13 at the time, but for the following 80 years, the wonder of my discovery has continued to grow on me. Those suites opened up a whole new world. I began playing them with indescribable excitement. They became my most cherished music. I studied and worked at them every day for the next 12 years. Yes, 12 years would elapse, and I would be 25 before I had the courage to play one of the suites in public at a concert. Up until then, no violinist or cellist had ever played one of the Bach suites in its entirety.
That was Dave Eggar performing the first two movements of the cello number 1 by Johann Sebastian Bach. Thank you, Dave, for the beautiful introduction to tonight's lecture. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues. On behalf of Crossroads, I extend a warm welcome to the 2017 Albacete Lecture on Faith and Culture. A special thanks goes out to the Sheen Center for hosting this special event. I am Mario Paredes, a member of the Crossroads Advisory Board. More importantly, it is my privilege and great joy to have been able to call Monsignor Lorenzo Albacete a close friend for almost 4 decades. Like so many touched by his daring, authentic faith, wit, and unfailing kindness, I can testify to his genius. A genius that was not just intellectual, but that was also evident in his sheer humanity, his compassion for others, his ready embrace of people of all backgrounds and beliefs, his boundless and eager curiosity about every person that he met, discovering in each and every human encounter a constantly renewed invitation and encouragement to encounter his Savior. Monsignor Lorenzo was in all respects an expert in humanity, but never in abstract. Telling at the heart of his priesthood was his faithful devotion to the care of his ailing brother, a task he fulfilled until the very end of his life. The primacy of that commitment often made him late for appointments, or sometimes even caused him to fail to show up for the speaking appearances. Indeed, he was far from the conventional type, both as a person and a thinker. He pushed the envelope in all that he did. He decisively and traditional way prompted the Board of Trustees of the Pontifical University of Puerto Rico in Ponce to ask for his resignation only 9 months after naming him president of the university. His rapid ouster earned him the moniker of Lorenzo the Brief. Then there was the time, way back, in 1978, when he was tasked to drive Cardinal Karol Wojtyła around Washington, D.C. for some sightseeing, and the two of them became engrossed in a philosophical discussion. Monsignor Lorenzo promised to send the visitor some books as a follow-up. That never happened. And he was reminded when his new acquaintance returned as Pope John Paul II the following year and gently scolded Lorenzo for his neglect when the two met again in St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington. Unbothered by the demands of a schedule and relatively superficial obligations, Monsignor Lorenzo preferred to look into the depth of things. That spirit animated Crossroad from its start in 2007 until our dear friend passing on October 24th, 2014. He once expressed that vision as follows, and I quote, "Confronted with an intensely polarized social and cultural environment, we have to resist the temptation to side with one party against the other, to identify enemies and fight their ideas. We cannot reduce the scope of our cultural work to apologetics. This would be a betrayal of Crossroads' original motives. The goal of our cultural work is not so much defending what we think we already know to be true, good, and right, but rather rediscovering in its reality again and again. This rediscovery is necessary because what is true, good, and right is not an idea or a doctrine. It is a living person. As Father Giussani once stated, looking for the traits of this person is the nature of reason. Close quote. Tonight, we are truly blessed and honored by the presence of Father Julián Carrón, the President of Communion and Liberation, to deliver this year's Albacete Lecture. A professor of theology at Milan Catholic University of the Sacred Heart, he took over the reins of the movement after passing of Monsignor Luigi Giussani in 2005. Please consult the program for his stellar background, and I warmly recommend his book of essays entitled Disarming Beauty, in which, just as in tonight's lecture, he tackles what some have identified as the lack of ontological density that leaves so many men and women in contemporary society feeling unmoored. Father Carrón will deliver his talk in Spanish. So please use your headsets for a simultaneous translation in English. Simply turn on the volume wheel on the receiver, placed number 1. Please help me to welcome Father Carrón to the stage. Welcome.
Thank you very much. De repente
All of a sudden,
cayeron bajo sus ojos las páginas
the pages,
descoloridas
the discolored pages, fell before his
en las
eyes,
que aparecían la suite de Johann Sebastian Bach.
in which the suite of Johann Sebastian Bach appeared.
Y él, Casal, miró aquellas páginas
And there, Casal saw those
con
pages
todo el asombro
with all the amazement
que determinaría su vida.
which would determine the rest of his life.
Todo comienza
Everything
por
begins
un hecho
because of a fact,
absolutamente sorprendente
a fact that is absolutely
que
surprising,
precede todo lo demás.
that precedes everything else.
Por eso el hecho
For this reason,
de haber escuchado
the fact of having heard
hace unos instantes
a few moments ago
suite
this suite
con el cello
of the cello, this cello suite,
es como la síntesis,
is the summary,
como la clave
the key
de lo que estamos celebrando en esta noche.
of what we're celebrating tonight,
Que
because
toda la vida de
the
Padre
entire,
Albacete
the entire life of Lorenzo Albacete
ha estado definida
was defined
por este hecho.
by this fact.
En el 2004,
In
en un
2004,
encuentro que tuvimos en Italia,
in a meeting that we had in Italy,
él nos contó cómo empezó
he told us
su
how
aventura aquí.
his adventure
Dice,
here
quiero
began.
subrayar la palabra amigos.
He said, I want
Todo
to
lo que ha
highlight this
sucedido
word friends.
Ha sido posible
Everything that
únicamente
happened
porque nos hemos
was
reconocido
possible
como
only
amigos
because we recognized that we were
que pueden
friends
contar con un respeto
who
recíproco.
had a mutual
se
respect
preguntaba,
for
¿qué
one
hago yo?
another. He used to ask himself,
Con esta gente
what do I do
laica
with
que
these
tiene una concepción secularista de la vida.
lay people who have a
Estas personas
secularized
son
conception?
intelectuales,
These are intellectuals, directors, eminent directors of important U.S. newspapers like the New York Times,
Washington Post,
the Washington Post,
revistas de izquierda
etc.
como La
Progressive
Nación,
magazines
o The
like
New
The
Republic,
Nation or The New Republic,
productores de documentales para la
documentary
televisión pública,
producers for NPR,
profesores
professors
distintas
of
universidades.
various universities.
El encuentro con esas
The
personas
encounter with these people
se ha producido
took place
de manera
in a
completamente
completely accidental
para
way
mí,
for me,
como para Casal.
just like for Casal.
Estas personas se reúnen
These people
semanalmente
meet once a week,
y habían expresado el deseo de admitirme
and they had
en su círculo,
expressed the idea
que
of
yo
the
he
desire of admitting me
denominado
into their circle,
el círculo
which
de
I had
izquierda.
called the Lefty
Lefty
Salon.
Allí discuten
There
sobre
they
política,
discuss politics,
arte, problemas
art,
mundiales,
world
filosofía.
problems,
Pero discuten
philosophy,
estas cosas porque
but they
se dan
discuss these
cuenta,
things because they realize,
admiten
they
que no
admit
saben nada nuevo sobre estos
that they don't
temas.
know anything new about them.
Se reúnen precisamente porque
They meet
reconocen la
precisely
necesidad de
because they
encontrar
recognize the
un
need
nuevo modo de afrontar
to encounter a
los
new
problemas
way
de la vida moderna.
of facing the problems of modern
Son
life.
conscientes de que su viejo
They're aware
secularismo
that their
ya no tiene nada
old
que decir a su
school
día de hoy.
secularism no
Es
longer
como la
has anything to
experiencia de un
say to
impasse.
today's life. It's the experience of an
Y
impasse.
continuaba.
And Albacete
Albacete.
continued.
Durante nuestro primer
In the
encuentro,
first meeting of the
en el
Lefty
Lefty
Salon,
les pregunté por qué motivo me
I
habían
asked them
invitado.
why they had
Pues
invited
ellos son
me.
personas famosas,
Because they're famous people,
expertas en cosas de las cuales yo no
experts in
tengo la más
things
mínima
that I
idea.
have no idea about.
Uno de ellos me dijo
One of them told me
que me había invitado
that he had
porque a pesar
invited
de
me
que ellos tenían
because
muchos amigos
despite the
curas,
fact that they have many
ninguno
priest
entre
friends,
estos tenía nada
none of
interesante
these
que decir,
priests said
nada
anything
diferente de lo
interesting
que
to
pudieran
say,
decir ellos. Y
nothing
añadió,
different from what they had to say.
los que piensan de forma
then he
distinta
added,
a nosotros
Those who think
no
differently
quieren
from
ser
us
nuestros amigos.
don't want to be our friends.
creen que somos malos,
because they think we're evil,
que deben evitarnos.
that they have to avoid us.
Un amigo mío me dijo
One of my friends told me
que yo había sido invitado
that
porque
he had
a pesar de
invited
que
me,
no
this is
pienso como
Lorenzo
ellos,
speaking, because
aprecio
even though I don't
su
think like
compañía.
them, I appreciate their companionship.
Me asombró este juicio de
This
Monseñor Albacete.
reasoning that Monsignor
La
Albacete made
disminución de la energía
amazed
de
me.
mis amigos está presente
I could
desde el
see
inicio,
the diminishment
porque un
of the
discurso
energy of my
intelectual no es
friends
capaz
from the
de
very
destruir
beginning,
este impasse.
because an intellectual
Solo un
discourse is not able to overcome
Solo un
this
encuentro
impasse. Only a
trae la
fact,
liberación.
only an encounter brings
En nuestros
liberation.
encuentros con estos amigos
In our meetings with these friends,
y con otros como ellos,
and
debemos
others
ser
like them,
conscientes del peligro
we have
de
to be
reducir
aware
nuestra
of the
experiencia
danger of reducing our own
términos
experience,
correctos
our hope, excuse
de
me,
un discurso.
to the correct terms of a discourse.
Solo un hecho
Only a fact
puede romper el impasse
can break the
por una
impasse
evidencia
through
incontestable.
something that is undeniably evident.
Es esto lo que
This is what
hoy
today
queremos
we want to
volver a vivir.
live
Simplemente
again,
como recuerdo de un pasado,
not just as a
sino como
memory of the past,
una
but as
experiencia presente.
a present experience.
El libro
The book
que presentamos,
that
y
we're
que-
presenting,
del que hablaremos
and about
un
which
poco en esta noche,
we're going to speak a little
tiene
bit
mucho que
tonight,
ver con esta experiencia de
has a lot
Monseñor
to
Albacete.
do with Monsignor Albacete's experience that he described.
Durante mucho tiempo, una
For many years,
casa de editorial de Milán
a publishing
insistía
house in Italy
que publicara un
was
libro,
insisting
pero
that
yo
I
no
publish a
necesitaba
book,
añadir nada más a mi biografía.
but I didn't want to add, I didn't need to add anything to
Tenía
my own
bastante trabajo que tenía
bibliography,
que hacer.
and I had many things to
Pero
do.
La posibilidad
But the possibility of being able to offer,
Monseñor Albacete alguna contribución
like Albacete
a la
said,
desorientación
some
que estamos
contribution
viviendo
to
todos,
this
a este
disorientation that
momento
we're
de
living
crisis que nos afecta a todos,
in this moment of crisis that affects us
me
all,
hizo aceptar finalmente
forced me
la
to finally
invitación
accept this
que durante
invitation
años me hacía
that for
la
many
editorial
years the
italiana.
Italian publishing house had
La
made.
intención era
My
como
intention
él,
was, like him,
la posibilidad de establecer un diálogo a
the
todo campo,
possibility of establishing a
donde
360-degree
pudiera
dialogue
encontrar las personas
where I could meet
más
people
aparentemente
who were
lejanas,
completely, at
que
least
después se
apparently,
han revelado
distant from us,
mucho más cercanas de lo que yo ni siquiera
who
podía
later
imaginar.
revealed themselves to be much closer
eso,
than I could have
Las
hoped
presentaciones que
for.
he hecho durante estos
So, the presentations that we have made over the last few years of
y las
this
que estoy
book,
haciendo ahora en Estados
and
Unidos
which
ha
I'm
sido la
doing
ocasión
now, have been the
como él,
occasion
de abrir un diálogo
to open a
con
dialogue
personas totalmente
with
distintas,
totally different people
pero
from
que
us.
tienen alguna pregunta, tienen
But
algún
those who
deseo de
have
entender lo que está
A
pasando en
question,
la
a
realidad.
desire to know what's going on in
Y lo
reality.
primero que me ha asombrado
And the first thing that
como le
that
asombraba
amazed
a él,
me, just
es
as
que
it
tantas
amazed
personas tan
Monsignor
distintas,
Albacete,
tantas
is that so
personas
many people who are so different,
muchísimo
so
más
diverse,
autorizadas que yo,
so much
con
more
historias tan
authoritative than
lejanas
I,
de la mía pudieran estar
with
interesadas
life
en el
histories that are
contenido.
so different from my own,
lo que
could be
el libro
interested
contenía.
in the contents of this
Para
book.
mí ha sido una sorpresa
This has been such a
palpar que
surprise
esta
for me.
desorientación que muchos viven,
Because
el impasse del que hablaba,
It's been a surprise to be able to experience
se revela
this,
paradójicamente como una
that this
ocasión de
disorientation so
como
many
fue para él.
live
Porque muchas
paradoxically
personas
reveals itself to
he
be an
conocido
occasion
que
for
pertenecían a
encountering others,
historias
because many
muy
people
lejanas
who
de la mía han
who
visto caer
I've
su
met
propia
and
ideología.
who belong to
Han visto caer
life
aquello
stories that are very
en
distant
lo
from
que
my
habían
own
creído durante años, a lo que habían dado la vida.
have seen their own ideology
Y
fall
por esto
apart.
ahora se encuentran como
And now
más
they
abiertos
see
a la
themselves, they find
posibilidad de
themselves to be
entablar
more
un diálogo.
open to the
Esto me
possibility of
permite
dialogue.
comprender cuál es la tarea.
And this allows me to understand
todos
what
nosotros.
is the task that we all have
Se
in
trata
front
de
of
un
us.
momento estupendo
It's a stupendous
poder
moment
compartir con los
in
demás
order to share with
lo
the
que nos ha
others
sucedido,
what has happened to
como
us
sucedió con Albacete.
as it happened
Con
to
muchas
Monsignor
personas
Albacete.
han dado
With many
comienzos
people, this has become
caminos absolutamente
the
imprevisibles.
beginning of a path that has been
Inimaginables.
completely unforeseeable,
Pero ha sido así.
unimaginable. But that's what
Como
happened.
diría el Papa Francisco, se han abierto
As
procesos.
Pope Francis
que no
says,
sabemos a dónde
processes have opened, and we don't
Esto
know where they're
dependerá
going to
de
take
cómo
us.
secunde cada
This
uno
is going to
de
depend
nosotros esta
on
chispa
how each of us
que ha
fans
saltado
the flame that has been
como
born,
saltó
as
en
it was
Casal
born in
o en
Casal
Albacete.
or in Albacete. I would have never thought that so many people would become so dear to me in such a short time, even to the point of sharing the very depths of their lives in a completely open dialogue, even about the most intimate and true aspects of their own lives. All these people with whom I've dialogued about this book, Disarming Beauty, in Italy, Spain, or Latin America, desire to continue this dialogue. And this relationship with them has continued to the point, in many cases, of becoming friends. Sincerely, I never imagined that what we live, what has been given to us, as it was to Monsignor Albacete, could be so interesting to so many people today, in this particular historical moment in which everything seems to be falling apart, and that it could bring about the desire to go deeper and to continue dialoguing. Because so many of the people that I have met and which I dialogue with have their own wound, as we all do. For this reason, during the presentations as I dialogue with intellectuals, journalists, politicians, and businessmen, I tried to dialogue with the person of today, with his or her doubts, uncertainties, insecurities, fears. All of them look for an answer that would welcome them, a proposal that would welcome them. An encounter in which they would feel embraced as they are. I found a completely unhoped for openness. Many of them understood that identity and openness are not against one another, and that in order to dialogue, it's not necessary to dilute one's own identity. It has been a dialogue in which I have once again learned, by answering the questions of people whom I've encountered, the very method I believe in already. I have verified that dialogue is the only method to measure oneself against the freedom of others, because there's no other way of having a relationship with truth if not through freedom. I never liked the idea of giving pre-packaged answers, but instead of helping people who I encountered, to suggest to them a path by which they could reach these answers through their own experience, because that's what has helped me in the first place. Like when I met Don Giussani, I already had many of my own answers. I went to the seminary when I was only 10 years old. I studied theology. I had a PhD. But as I used to say to Don Giussani, when I met you, I began to really walk down a truly human path of the faith. And it's only by following the path of experience have I been able to encounter the complete density of all the things that I had learned before, rediscovering them as something absolutely new. For this reason, I wanted to share with you tonight some of the intuitions that perhaps can help us to understand what is the situation in which we find ourselves today. In the first place, let's try and understand what's happening, a change of era. Pope Francis said that we're not living in an era of change, but in a change of era, of epoch. Situations that we live today propose challenges to us that are even difficult to understand. That's what Pope Francis said to the Italian church in Florence in 2015. We find ourselves, as it were, in a dark wood, confused, disoriented. And this dark forest makes itself even more dense, because certain certainties which we all used to share are less and less shared every day.
en muchas de las conversaciones
And we
que
find
tenemos
this
todos los días con
in
las
many of the
personas
conversations that
con las que
we have
convivimos.
every day with many of the people that we
Desde el
live
sentido del
with.
trabajo,
At
¿por
work,
qué tener un hijo?
why
Una
should we have
familia,
work? Why should we
amar a
work?
alguien o
Why should we have
implicarse en un cambio
why should we have a child?
por
Why
la
should we have a
sociedad.
family? Why should we
Desde
love someone
interesarse por las
or try
personas
to
que
change
llegan,
society
los emigrantes,
or
hasta responder
welcome the
al
people
terrorismo
who
de un
come
modo
or
que
welcome
no cree
immigrants?
más violencia,
Or why should we not respond to terrorism in a way that creates more
que nos
violence?
enjuician a todos,
Problems
que nos
that urge
plantean
us
muchísimos
all
interrogantes.
and that pose many,
Yo
many
también
questions to us.
quiero entender esto.
I
¿Por
too
qué
want to
esto
understand
sucede?
this.
Y ha sucedido.
Why does this happen?
Comparto el juicio
And I share
del
the
sociólogo y
judgment
filósofo
of the-
americano Matthew Crawford,
of Matthew Crawford, the sociologist and
calidad de
philosopher,
herederos
who says,
de estratos
as the inheritors of
civilizaciones
layers of
acerca de la persona
theorization
humana,
about the human person,
no nos parece una
we find it
menor
no trivial task to recover
recuperar un
a more
acceso
direct
más
access to our
directo
own experience.
a nuestra experiencia.
Unquote.
Ya hace años
Already
me
some
había
years
llamado la
ago,
atención una frase de una
I was struck
connacional mía,
by a phrase of a
española,
Spanish
María
philosopher,
Zambrano,
Maria Zambrano,
en la que
in which
ponía justamente
she
el énfasis
she put the
en lo mismo que
emphasis
dice Crawford.
on what Crawford was
Lo
saying,
que
and I
está
quote,
en crisis
"What is in
en
crisis
es este
is this
nexo
mysterious
misterioso
nexus
que une
that unites
nuestro ser
our being
con la realidad.
with reality,
Algo tan
something
profundo
so profound and fundamental
que es nuestro
that is
íntimo
our
sustento.
own intimate
Por
nourishment."
eso, como
So,
falta este nexo con la realidad,
so when this nexus,
tenemos
this
esta
connection is
dificultad
lacking,
para entender,
we find this difficulty to
desaparición
understand
de este nexo
ourselves,
hace que seamos fácilmente esclavos
and we easily
de
become
aquello que nos
slaves
dicen a dónde tenemos
of
que
those
mirar,
who
porque
want
no
to
lo
point
podemos
us in different directions,
conocer
tell us
por
what to
nosotros mismos.
look at, because we don't know ourselves.
Como no tenemos acceso directo a la realidad,
Since we don't have direct
dependemos de todo
access
lo que nos
to
digan otros.
reality, we depend on what others
Escribe
tell us.
Crawford.
Crawford continues,
sin la
quote,
capacidad de dirigir nuestra
"Without the
atención,
ability to direct our attention
queremos,
where we will,
nos disponemos
we become
mejor
more receptive
hacia aquellos que dirigen nuestra
to
atención
those who would
a donde
direct
quieren
our
ellos.
attention to
Siempre
where
hay
they
alguien que
will,
nos explica
to the omnipresent purveyors
qué es la realidad.
of marshmallows."
Los
Unquote.
omnipresentes repartidores de caramelos, es decir, la moda.
That is
Nos
fashion.
volvemos más sugestionables.
We're more
y
easily
compramos más
suggested. We buy more things.
Pero ¿por qué
But why?
ha sucedido este
Why did all this
derrumbe
this
de las
collapse
cosas
happen?
que hasta hace poco parecían
The
evidentes?
collapse of the things that
A mí me ha
up
ayudado
until
mucho
recently seemed very certain.
una frase
evident.
que dijo hace años el Papa
I was very
XVI,
helped by a sentence of Pope Benedict that he
Porque
said several years ago,
dice en modo sintético
because it says it in a way that perfectly
qué
sums
es lo
up
que
this point,
sucede en este
this
momento.
point of what's happening right now.
Él se remonta hace algún siglo atrás,
He
en la
speaks
época de la Ilustración,
About the time of the
en
Enlightenment,
la que
centuries ago,
después de la gran ruptura
in which after the
de
great
la unidad
breakup
religiosa europea,
of the
de
religious
lo que
unity of Europe,
compartíamos todos, la fe
we all
cristiana,
shared the Christian faith
con la reforma
with the Protestant
protestante,
Reformation,
a las que siguieron las famosas
and then the
llamadas
famous, the
guerras de
so-called
religión,
wars of religion,
cuando ya los cristianos nos hartamos
in which
de
we Christians
pelear entre nosotros,
fought amongst
había que poner
ourselves.
unas bases nuevas
There was the attempt to try and create
la nueva
a new
convivencia
basis
que queríamos
for
establecer.
social life.
y entonces
And so,
el gran genio
the great genius of Immanuel Kant
intuyó
was the intuition
que
that
aquello que podía servir
that
como base
what
para esta nueva
could be the
convivencia
basis of this new social
era
fabric
tratar de salvar
was to try and
aquellas
safeguard
grandes convicciones
the great
que nos
convictions
había traído el cristianismo
that Christianity had brought forth,
para que pudieran constituir la
so
base
they
nueva de
could
la
be
convivencia,
the new basis of
Pero-
society.
intentando salvar estas
But in
convicciones
trying to safeguard these
con una evidencia
convictions,
tal que no tuvieran necesidad de estar
the idea was that they were
vinculadas
so
a
evident
las
that they didn't
historias-
need to be
a la
connected
historia religiosa que
to the
le había
religious
traído hasta
history that brought them about.
aquí. Es muy significativo
And it's very significant.
un texto
There's a text that is very
de-
significant
de Kant
a text of Immanuel
que
Kant's,
dice,
in which he says,
se puede creer tranquilamente
we can easily believe
que si el Evangelio
that if the gospel
no hubiese
had not
enseñado
first
estas
taught
grandes
us
convicciones
the great
que
convictions
compartimos,
that we all
las
share,
leyes éticas universales,
the universal
en su
ethical
pureza
laws,
original,
in their original purity,
la razón
reason
no las habría podido reconocer,
would never have been able
no
to
las habría
recognize
conocido
them.
en su plenitud.
They would never have been able to achieve them in their fullness.
Reconoce
Kant
que
himself
sin
recognizes
la contribución,
that without the contribution of Christianity,
sin el Evangelio,
without the gospel,
nosotros
Christ,
no lo hubiéramos podido reconocer.
we would have never been
No
able to
hubiéramos
recognize
podido
these
conocer.
values.
No habríamos podido con nuestra inteligencia
With our own,
llegar a conocer.
with our own intelligence, we
Pero
wouldn't have been
ahora,
able to. But
Una
now,
vez que ya existen y nosotros la conocemos por
now
el
that they
Evangelio,
exist and we know them,
nosotros ya no necesitamos pertenecer a aquel lugar,
we no longer need to belong to that place that brought them to us,
condiciones que era la Iglesia.
which is the
Nosotros
church.
la podemos reconocer
We
simplemente
can
con
recognize
nuestra
them
razón.
with our own reason.
Por eso,
So for
escribe
that
muy
reason,
bien el
he describes very well,
Papa Benedicto.
Pope Benedict
En
describes
aquella
very
época
well
se pensó, como muestra este texto de Kant,
that in
que las
that
grandes
era,
convicciones
people thought that the great convictions that came about because of
en gran parte
Christianity
resistían y parecían innegables.
were undeniable and could survive on their own.
Pero estas palabras tan fuertes
But these strong words of Pope Benedict
le han dado
strike
la
us.
razón a Kant.
Because did they mean
¿Qué ha
that Kant was
sucedido
right?
delante
What happened
de los desafíos de la historia?
in the face of the
¿Han
challenges
podido
of history?
resistir los avatares de la historia?
Have they held up
La
throughout the
búsqueda de una
vicissitudes of history?
certeza que resistiese
The
todos los
quest
avatares
for a
de la
certainty
historia,
that could resist
¿dónde ha quedado?
all the
El
vicissitudes
Papa Benedicto,
of
que no es
history.
justamente un relativo
What happened to it?
dice,
Pope
esto
Benedict says
es lo que ha fracasado.
it has been a failure.
Lo que estamos viviendo
What we are living
es el fracaso
is the
de
failure
separar
to
las
separate
grandes convicciones
the great
que ha
convictions
traído el
that
cristianismo
Christianity brought
de su origen histórico.
from their historical origin.
Que una vez que hemos comprendido de qué se trata,
So we had this idea that
con
once
el
we understood
contenido
them,
claro,
now that we had the content clear
fuerza moral,
and our own moral strength,
no necesitamos
we no longer needed,
pertenecer a la Iglesia
to belong
y,
to
por
the
tanto,
church.
no necesitamos pertenecer a Cristo.
and therefore we no longer needed to belong to Christ.
Esto,
Este
intento
This,
absolutamente genial
ingenious effort,
del Papa Benedicto
Pope Benedict says,
es lo que estamos viendo que se ha derrumbado. Esta es la
is what we are
naturaleza
seeing
profunda
fall
de
apart.
la crisis.
This is the
La crisis
profound
económica
nature of the
o de
crisis.
otro tipo,
The economic crisis,
en las que
every
muchas veces
type of
nos
crisis
quedamos como
in which
paralizados,
we find ourselves paralyzed.
es solo la apariencia.
This is only the appearance.
Hemos pasado guerras mundiales, hemos
We've lived
atravesado
through
revoluciones
world wars,
tecnológicas,
technological
pero
revolutions,
lo compartíamos,
but we all shared
las grandes convicciones.
these
El
great
problema que ahora
convictions. The problem is that
estas
now
grandes convicciones
these great convictions
ya han desaparecido
have disappeared
de la vida general de todos. Y
from
por
the
eso es tan difícil
overall life of
ponernos de
people, the
acuerdo
common
sobre
life
las
of people.
cuestiones más elementales.
And so it's difficult to reach an agreement on the most elementary
Describe
things.
lo que ha sucedido con claridad. Estos grandes valores,
Henri de Lubac describes
los valores
this
a que se
very
refiere
clearly.
son el espíritu,
These
la
great
razón,
values,
la bondad, verdad,
and he's referring to the
fraternidad,
values of
justicia,
spirit,
sin los
reason,
cuales
freedom, truth, fraternity,
no
justice,
existe verdadera humanidad,
without which true humanity doesn't exist,
se han convertido muy pronto en irreales.
have quickly become unreal.
Conservan muchos valores de origen cristiano
They preserve many values of Christian
para
value,
mantenerse con vida
of origin,
como
Christian origin.
separados.
but once they're separated from their source,
Por eso, la cuestión ahora es
separated from their
darnos
source,
cuenta
we have to
que lo que
realize
nosotros tenemos delante
that what
dice
we
que
have in
son
front of us
ideales
are ideals,
demasiado abstractos,
ideals which are too
mitos
abstract,
colectivos,
collective myths.
pero que son pálidos si los ponemos delante
They are
de los
pale,
ídolos de la
lifeless.
carne y de la sangre.
When we put them in front of the idols of flesh and blood,
La evidencia
the power, the fashion of
Hablaba el
power.
Papa Benedicto equivale en Henry de Libac a la palabra irreal,
Pope Benedict uses the same word de Lubac, unreal,
como si hubieran desaparecido
as if these values had
con
gone
esa
up in smoke.
concreción.
They lost their reality, their concrete, authentic existence.
Han desaparecido.
Why have they
Porque
disappeared?
dice de Libac que
Because de
sin
Lubac
que
says,
emanen constantemente de su origen, del acontecimiento
if they don't continue to come from their origin, from the event,
hecho surgir y que los ha
from what gave them
mantenido
origin,
y que los ha traído hasta nuestros días,
and how they came into our very day, to our time,
interesante
they become
es
unreal.
que ahora esto siempre me lo dicen los
The interesting thing is that today,
católicos,
Catholic theologians say it,
sino que un sociólogo
It's
de
not-
la categoría
excuse me,
de Bauman, dice,
not
lo que
Catholic
creíamos
theologians.
que era inamovible,
but a sociologist like Bauman,
era tan evidente que parecía inamovible,
he says it. What we
y
believed
ya
was
no podía
immobile,
derrumbarse,
what
se
couldn't fall
convierte
apart,
en
what
líquido.
couldn't collapse, what couldn't go into
Somos una
crisis,
sociedad líquida.
becomes liquid.
Ya nada
We're
tiene
in
la
a
consistencia
liquid
de antes,
society.
y por eso nos encontramos con esta dificultad
It
para
no longer
hablar,
has the
para
same
entendernos, porque
consistency
todo
it
lo que hemos
had.
compartido durante siglos,
What
ahora
we
ya no
shared
resulta
for-
evidente como para poderlo reconocer.
For centuries, we no
Creo que
longer
hoy en día
have
la
in common.
confusión es un sentimiento común en nuestras sociedades.
I believe
como
that
si nos
confusion
encontrásemos
is a common feeling in our
constantemente en medio de un
societies
huracán.
today.
Como
It's
lo
as
que
if we
han
found
relatado
ourselves
América
constantly in the middle of a
Latina, que hace que la
hurricane,
gente se sienta
like the
desorientada,
hurricanes that have
sin seguridad.
devastated the Caribbean
Lo
recently.
describe muy bien el periodista del New York Times.
We feel disoriented
Thomas
without
Friedman.
security.
Para
Thomas
él,
Friedman
la
of the New York
confusión
Times describes it well.
se debe al rápido cambio del mundo que
For him,
conocíamos,
the confusion
que
is
ya
due
casi
to the
no
rapid
reconocemos.
change in the world which we knew and which we
Escribe
almost
Friedman.
don't recognize any
Esta
longer.
discrepancia entre
Friedman
el mundo
writes,
que conocíamos y el de hoy
This
está en la
mismatch
base de
is at the
este
center
tumulto
of much of the turmoil
que
roiling
agita hoy
politics
en día
and
el
society
mundo político y la
in both
sociedad,
developed and
ya sea
developing
en los
countries
países
today.
industrializados como en aquellos que están en vías de desarrollo. Un capítulo interesante de esta historia es el papel que ha jugado la Iglesia.
An important chapter in this history is the role that the church has played in the process.
El gran poeta inglés se preguntaba hace
The great
tiempo,
poet T.S. Eliot
¿es la
asked,
Iglesia
more than half a
la que ha
century ago,
abandonado la humanidad? ¿O
is
es
it the
la humanidad
church who abandoned
la que ha
humanity
abandonado la Iglesia?
or
Esta es
humanity
una
who abandoned the
pregunta
church?
totalmente pertinente, porque
We are
es
dealing
evidente
with a pertinent question, but it is
algo no ha
clear that
funcionado
something has
en la
not
transmisión
worked
de la fe,
in the transmission of the
en la
faith,
comunicación de esta evidencia,
in the
esta
communication of the
para
certainty
llegar
of
a la
this
situación en
evidence,
la que nos encontramos.
in order for us to
Ya
arrive at the
en los
situation in
años
which we
60,
find ourselves.
Se reconocía que la secularización
Already in the
y el ateísmo
1960s, it was clear that secularization and atheism could be seen as a way for
según
Christians,
el Papa Benedicto,
according to Pope Benedict,
el teólogo
even then,
Ratzinger,
at that point,
una
Ratzinger,
oportunidad para los cristianos de descubrir la verdadera naturaleza del cristianismo.
was a way for Christians to discover the
Sea
true
cual sea
nature
la
of
responsabilidad
Christianity.
de los cristianos en esta situación, la
Whatever
pérdida
the responsibility of Christians in this situation may be,
es un problema que nos afecta
the
a
loss of
todos.
evidences is a
Cualquiera que
problem
sea
which affects
la
all of
confesión,
us,
la posición en la
of
sociedad,
whatever denomination, whatever
la-
position in society,
posición cultural,
whatever
que
position we
uno
have in front of
prefiera,
reality,
ya sea ateo, cristiano,
whether-
budista o agnóstico.
again,
de
whatever,
derecha
of whatever
o de
stripe,
izquierda, de un
atheist,
partido o
Christian,
de otro.
Buddhist, agnostic, left,
Todos
right,
nos hallamos delante del mismo desafío.
we all find ourselves in front of the same challenge.
Segundo, la crisis actual para muchos es una desgracia, pero esta crisis puede convertirse
For many
en
people,
una
this
oportunidad.
crisis is an unfortunate, terrible thing, but it can be
La crisis,
generative.
como toda crisis, nos plantea preguntas
Hannah Arendt
que
says the crisis poses questions for all of us.
a plantearnos cuestiones que
Arendt says a
para las que no
crisis
tenemos respuestas
forces us back to the
no
questions
sirven, las
themselves
respuestas viejas.
and requires from us either
una
new or
crisis
old answers, but in
algo
any case, direct
fundamental
judgments.
para entender qué es lo que nos está pasando.
It's
Porque
fundamental
puede
to
ser
understand what's happening to us.
verdaderamente una ocasión única para comprender mejor
A crisis becomes a
que
disaster only when we
estamos
respond to it with performed
necesitados.
judgments, that is,
siempre,
prejudices.
como dice Hannah Arendt, que no repitamos aquellas cosas que ya se han
Such an attitude not only sharpens the crisis, but makes us forfeit the experience of reality and the opportunity for reflection it provides.
Por eso esta ocasión, esta crisis, es una ocasión para
This
establecer este
crisis
diálogo
is an opportunity.
y ponernos juntos delante
It's
de
an
estas
opportunity to this
preguntas.
dialogue and to put ourselves in front of these questions. Because in this way, it will come to light. We can see who is really capable of answering, of offering something that responds to our questions, to these questions. And they're not abstract questions. They are questions that enter into the drama of life. Why do I go to work? Why do I get up in the morning? Why do I get married? Why do I not just live with someone? Why do I have a child? Why is it worthwhile not to steal? Why shouldn't I cheat someone? Why shouldn't I do violence to someone and imposing a truth on him? Why is it that a religion shouldn't put truth, impose truth on others by means of violence? These are questions we all have. We ask ourselves these questions, we Christians.
Me llamaba mucho la atención
which we have to
que
offer.
estas preguntas normales son las que la gente se encuentra.
These are normal questions that people ask themselves in normal life.
Me decía una amiga que el día que anunció en su trabajo
A friend of mine told me that in the day that she announced that she was getting married, everyone looked at her astonished.
Con tu edad tan joven, te casas,
So
y además
young,
para siempre.
why are you getting married forever?
Fueron a la boda,
When they went to the wedding,
no podían creer lo que veían.
they couldn't believe what they
Estaban
saw.
tan asombrados que apenas volvieron del viaje de novios, le asaltaron.
They couldn't believe it. As soon as they got back from their honeymoon, everyone was asking them about what happened, about all the beauty they had seen.
Es lo que sucede.
This is what happens.
Para la mayoría ya casarse es una palabra vacía.
For most people,
Solo cuando ven
to get
la belleza
married
de algo,
is an
empiezan
empty
a
thing.
intuir que puede ser
Only when they see the beauty of
que a lo
something
mejor se están perdiendo algo.
can they intuit that they
Y que lo
may be
que ellos
missing
no
something.
entienden, quizá
They don't understand,
puede tener algo de bello,
but may have something
como
beautiful,
lo acaban de ver en la boda de su amiga.
as they just saw
Por
in
eso una
that
situación como esta,
wedding of a friend.
cuando alguien la encuentra, favorece el diálogo. Porque
In a
nos
situation
encuentra
like
más
that,
abiertos, menos
allows
presuntuosos,
a
más
dialogue.
disponibles
People are more
a
open,
escucharnos.
curious.
Pero ¿cuál es la condición de este diálogo?
What's the condition of that dialogue?
Tercer punto, la libertad.
Third point, freedom.
Si tuviese que elegir una palabra para identificar el contenido de los desafíos actuales,
If I had to
elegiría esta
choose a
palabra,
word
porque como dice,
to represent the challenge in front of us, I would
la
choose this
libertad
word.
es como el valor
Freedom is the
más
greatest, is the
querido
value
para
most
nuestra cultura y para
most
cada uno de
appreciated,
nosotros. En la
most
conciencia
understood by our culture,
de la humanidad de hoy,
most precious.
escribí hace años, la libertad aparece con gran diferencia como el bien más alto,
It appears as
al que todos
the
los
highest
demás
good, said Ratzinger,
quedan subordinados.
to which everything else is measured.
En esta cultura ilustrada,
In this
la
enlightened
libertad
culture,
aparece como el valor fundamental.
freedom appears
que
as the
mide todo lo demás.
fundamental value, which
Por eso se
measures
trata
everything
también de un
else.
desafío a cualquier propuesta de respuesta a esta situación. Porque
This is
esto
a challenge for
dice
every situation.
cómo no puede ser encontrada la verdad y no puede ser comunicada
You can't
sino a
meet the
través
truth
de la
without freedom.
En este sentido,
In this sense,
es muy útil
it's very
darse
useful
cuenta
to
el
realize
recorrido que ha hecho la Iglesia
the path that the
para
church itself
llegar
has made.
a la conciencia que se ha expresado en el decreto sobre la libertad religiosa del concilio.
In the Second
Vaticano
Vatican Council and the understanding of freedom and the
dice
relationship of
que no
Christianity to
existe
freedom,
otro acceso
there
a la
is no
verdad
access to
que no
truth
sea a través de la libertad.
unless it's through freedom.
La libertad religiosa, decía Benedicto XVI,
Freedom, religious freedom, said
era
Pope
una
Benedict
necesidad que
XVI,
deriva de la convivencia humana,
is a
una
necessity
consecuencia
that
intrínseca de la
comes
verdad
from human
que
freedom.
no se puede imponer desde fuera, sino que el hombre
It cannot be
la debe
imposed
hacer
from
suya
without, from
solo
outside,
mediante un proceso de convicción.
It can only be realized through a process of conviction.
Porque la libertad
certainty.
religiosa deriva de la conciencia
Religious
de la naturaleza de la
religious
verdad.
conviction
No
comes from
es
this freedom.
simplemente como una nueva estrategia, como no hemos podido convencer a los demás.
It's not simply a
de la
new
verdad del
strategy.
cristianismo, cambiemos la estrategia.
We can't just change strategies. No,
No ha sido esto lo que ha aprendido la Iglesia.
this is not
sido
what the
darse
church has
cuenta
learned.
Que la naturaleza de la verdad cristiana
The church has learned that the nature
para
of
poder ser
Christian
descubierta,
truth
para poder ser reconocida,
can and must be realized through
porque la
freedom.
verdad no puede ser impuesta desde fuera.
It cannot be imposed from outside. Man has to embrace it himself and make it his
La
own
verdad
through
no se
freedom.
impone de otra manera, sino por la fuerza
The truth cannot be
de la
imposed
verdad misma.
except by the strength of the truth
Por
itself.
eso, el cardenal Ratzinger reconocía que fue precisamente mérito de la Ilustración
For this
el
reason,
haber replanteado estos
Ratzinger
valores
realized that it
originales del
was
cristianismo
this was the great
y el haber
value
devuelto
of the
a la
Enlightenment,
razón
that
su propia voz.
the merit of the Enlightenment was to have drawn
El
attention
Concilio Vaticano
afresh
II,
to
en la
those
Constitución
original
sobre la
Christian
Iglesia y el
values
mundo contemporáneo,
and given reason back its
subrayó
own
nuevamente
voice.
esta profunda correspondencia entre
In its
cristianismo
constitution on the Church
e
of the Modern
Ilustración.
World, the Second Vatican Council
Buscando
restated
llegar
this
a
profound
una verdadera
harmony between
conciliación
Christianity and Enlightenment,
entre la Iglesia
seeking to achieve a
modernidad.
genuine reconciliation between the
Por
Church
eso,
and modernity.
La libertad tiene ante sí
For
un
this
gran
reason,
desafío.
there is a great challenge
Durante mucho tiempo
in front of the Church and in front of freedom.
que para ser verdaderamente libres es necesario
In order to be
no
free,
estar ligado a ningún vínculo.
we used to, for a long time, we believed that you had to be free of all shackles, of all confinements.
Pero después hemos descubierto
But we've
que
discovered
no es suficiente
that that's not enough.
la ausencia de constricciones
The
para ser libres.
a lack of
Porque
constrictions,
para
of
moverse,
freeing ourselves from our shackles is
Para
not enough
realizarse plenamente la libertad,
in order to fully realize
para
freedom.
que nuestra libertad se mueva, hace falta
In order for our freedom to
una razón
move, it
adecuada
has to
para
have
moverse.
a reason, an adequate reason.
Hace falta, tiene necesidad de tener un atractivo.
It needs
que la
something
mueva.
attractive,
En esta situación,
something attractive that moves
hay una
moves
pregunta
us.
que nos debemos hacer todos.
In this
¿Hay
situation, there's a
algo
question
capaz
we must
de
confront.
atraer la libertad
Is
lo
there
suficiente
something capable of
hasta el
attracting our
punto de
freedom
moverla?
to the point
Hay
of
tantas
making it
personas
move?
que tienen miedo a la libertad.
There may be
que
people who
ya
are afraid of
prefieren
freedom,
usarla.
who prefer not to use it,
Usarla no basta, no es
because
ser
to use our
contenido
freedom,
de ningún
you
modo.
can't just be
Hace falta que yo
unshackled.
tenga algo delante por lo que valga la pena empeñarme, por lo que valga
Is
la
there
pena
something
esforzarme, porque valga la pena
really worth moving
jugarme la
towards?
partida. Si no existe
What makes it worthwhile?
algo que verdaderamente desafía la libertad,
If
por
there
la que
isn't
yo,
really something that
para
challenges
no
freedom,
perdérmelo, quiero empeñar
and not
toda
to
mi
lose
libertad,
it, I need
es
to
necesario
use
descubrir
all my freedom.
aquello
I want
por
to
lo que vale la pena
I want to
esforzarse.
discover what it is
Si la libertad no
that is
encuentra
worth
ese atractivo
my while,
suficiente para
worth my
moverse,
while to
el hombre
move, to
se
work.
queda paralizado en el centro del propio yo. Puede llenar la vida de
Otherwise,
tantas
man
distracciones,
stays paralyzed in
pero
his
no hay
own
nada
own
que
being.
mueva al hombre desde lo más íntimo de sí mismo.
If there isn't something that moves
Como yo
him in
decía
the
hace
most
años de
intimate, in the
meditación.
center of his being.
A pesar de las muchas apariencias, toda su acción y su agitación
Despite all
no son
appearances,
capaces
all of
de
his
mover
action,
lo
all of
más
his
profundo
agitation,
de
they're
nuestro
not
ser.
capable of moving his being, of
Esto
moving
puede
his true self.
suceder a nivel personal o a nivel social.
This can happen at the personal
Me ha
level
llamado mucho la
or
atención
the
una
social
anécdota
level.
que después ha acabado en el libro de una
Some things
persona
have
que me escribía así.
struck me very
Anoche
much, and
escribe una persona, fui
someone
a cenar a
wrote
casa
me,
de dos compañeros
and I'll
del liceo.
tell this letter that
Estaban
someone
comprometidos y
wrote
vivían
me.
juntos.
Last night,
Después de la cena,
I went to
quedamos hablando
I
mucho
went to
rato,
dinner at the
y en la
house of some high
conversación
school
salió la
friends
cuestión
who are engaged in living together.
si tener hijos o no.
After dinner, we talked for a while, and
amigo
during the
decía,
conversation, the question of whether or not to have
Nunca
children
traeré
came
al
up.
mundo un hijo.
My friend said, I will
¿Con qué
never
valor
bring a child into the
Puedo yo
world.
condenar a otro pobrecillo
What is the point
a la
of
infelicidad?
condemning another
quiero
poor
asumir
thing
esta
to unhappiness? I don't want to assume that responsibility.
Tengo
And he
miedo
added,
de mi libertad.
I'm afraid of my
En el
freedom.
mejor de los casos, no sirve
In the
para
best
nada.
case scenario, it's
Y en el peor de
useless.
los casos puede causar dolor.
And in the
a
worst
alguien.
case, I can cause someone
Lo que
a
espero
lot
de
of
la vida
suffering.
es hacer el menor daño posible.
What I hope from life is to cause the least damage
Esta persona-
possible.
Se ve que ya no tiene una razón suficiente.
We see this
para
person
poder
does
traer
not
un hijo.
have a good
Ya
enough
no es
reason to bring a child
suficiente
into the world.
No estar constreñido para nada.
It's not good enough not to be constrained
Pero
by things.
el no estar constreñido, el no estar forzado a hacer algo, no basta para
It's not good
que
enough not to be
pueda
forced to do
verdaderamente
things.
poner en juego toda su razón. y
It's
su
not
libertad.
enough to put all of your freedom and
Esto
all
puede
your
pensar
reason
alguno que se trata de un
into
caso
play.
clínico. No, esto es algo que está tan difundido
This is
que
something so
una persona
common.
como Kafka, que es como un emblema,
It's like someone like
nuestra
Kafka,
cultura,
who is almost an
decía,
emblem of our
se
culture.
temen la libertad y la responsabilidad.
We fear
Y por
freedom
tanto,
and
se prefiere
responsibility.
asfixiarse dentro de la jaula
And
que
for
se ha
this
construido.
reason, we
Por no
prefer
citar a Dostoyevsky,
to asphyxiate
que
ourselves, to
decía que ya estamos
asphyxiate
buscando
ourselves in the
siempre
cage that we've built.
alguien sobre el cual descargar el peso de nuestra libertad.
We're always
En
looking
vez
for
de que uno
something to,
encuentre algo por el que diga,
to get the
"No,
burden of our
quiero
freedom.
ser yo el que
Get rid of.
ahora meto la mano en la pasta y quiero implicar toda mi persona, como cuando sucede algo verdaderamente
In order
maravilloso.
to
No es
put
que
myself
uno se
into
enamore y
play
después
and
quiere que
do
pase
everything
el
that I
otro con la
can,
chica que se ha enamorado. Quiere ser él el que vive
I need something,
en primera persona
something that
todas las
moves
implicaciones
my person,
de este amor.
that implicates me this
Si no sucede esto,
in a love. If something
no
doesn't pull me
tenemos una
out,
razón para
we don't have a reason
implicar nuestra libertad.
to put our
Por
freedom
eso
into
todos
play.
nos hallamos delante de este desafío.
We all find ourselves in front of this
¿Y cómo
challenge.
respondemos?
And how do we
Superando
answer?
el esquema de las guerras de religión que no nos han llevado a ninguna parte.
Going
He
beyond
leído que
this
Russell
war of
Moore,
religions,
presidente de la Comisión
mindset that
Ética
hasn't
de
led
la
anywhere.
South Baptist Conference, la agencia de la
I read that
denominación
Russell
protestante
Moore,
más numerosa de los Estados
president of the
Unidos,
Ethical Commission of the
apunta
South Baptist Conference,
hacia la reconciliación y no a la hegemonía
Moore
obtenida
points
a
towards the
través de la
reconciliation
imposición de una
rather
verdad
than
propia.
hegemony obtained by
Esto
means
no
of the
significa
imposition of
retirarse
truth.
del mundo,
This doesn't
sino
mean
cambiar
withdrawing
el
from the
método
world,
de relación con los
but
demás,
rather
como
changing the
decía
method
el mismo
with which we relate to others,
Albacete encontrándose con los amigos
just like our
de la
wonderful
Lefty Salon.
Albacete did in meeting with his
Moore
friends
escribe,
from the Lefty Salon.
El cristianismo que esté separado de la
Moore
cultura
writes,
que le rodea es un cristianismo
A
destinado al
Christianity that is walled off from the
Tratémonos
culture
de ser
around it
aquellos que luchan
is
por
a
la
Christianity
cultura,
that
no
dies.
aquellos que se baten contra la cultura.
Let's be those who contend for
Reconoceremos la
culture,
necesidad de
but
un
not those who are
compromiso
at
en
war with the
política o en
culture.
la acción social, aunque
We will
veamos los
recognize the
límites de esta
necessity of
acción,
engagement in social and
pero
political
nos
action,
comprometeremos
even as
no
we
con
see
la
the limits of
finalidad
such
de vencer,
action.
sino con el fin de encontrar
But we will
una
engage,
reconciliación.
not with the end goal of winning, but with the
Esto
end goal of
significa que
reconciliation.
nosotros los cristianos, al igual que cada
This
uno,
means that we Christians,
hemos de
just like every
redescubrir una
man,
forma de estar
must
presentes en
rediscover
la
a way of
sociedad
being present in society
sin cultivar la pretensión
without
de
cultivating the
dominar.
claim
¿Qué puede ser el
of
método?
dominating.
¿Cuál
What could the
puede ser
method
el
of this
método de
presence
esta
be?
presencia? No
What
cabe
could be the
duda
method of this
que el
presence?
único método adecuado, como nos está
For
diciendo
me, I have no
constantemente
doubts.
el Papa Francisco,
There is
es
only
el método
one
de la
method,
testimonianza. Y me
the method of
sorprende
witness.
que encontrar en Moore, me sorprende
And-
encontrar en Moore la
And
misma
I
percepción de la
I
cuestión.
was surprised to find in more
La
the
Iglesia,
same
dice,
understanding, the same perception of the
tiene ahora la
question. He writes,
oportunidad de dar testimonio en una
the
cultura
church
que
now
con
has the
frecuencia
opportunity
no
to
finge
bear witness
ni
in a
siquiera
culture that
compartir
often does
nuestros
not even
valores.
pretend to share our
Esto no
values.
es una tragedia,
That is not a
puesto que
tragedy,
nunca
since we were never
se nos
given a
había
mission to
asignado
promote
la misión de
values in the
promover
first
valores,
place,
sino de hablar
but to
de
speak
Cristo y de su
instead
reino.
of sin and righteousness
Solo
and
a
judgment,
través del testimonio,
of Christ and His
como en los
kingdom.
inicios del cristianismo,
Only through a
podremos
witness,
contribuir
like at the very
al
beginning
bien
of
de las
Christianity,
personas y de la
can we
sociedad.
contribute to the good of
Porque en
people
una
and
sociedad
society.
como esta,
In a
no se puede
society,
crear algo
in a society
nuevo
like ours,
si no es con la vida.
you cannot create
Decía
something
Giussani.
new
No hay estructura,
except with a life,
ni organización, ni iniciativa que se sostenga.
not an organization, not
Solamente
an
una vida
institution,
nueva.
just
Es
a new
decir,
life.
Algo que de nuevo se realiza y está delante de nosotros en
Something
modo
that
visible.
becomes real and becomes
No
real
en un modo
in front of
irreal.
us, in a
De
visible
nuevo se
way,
convierte
and
en
an
real.
unreal way.
Solamente una vida nueva, real,
Only a new life,
atractiva,
real,
como de casarse,
attractive, like
como
getting
ir a trabajar
married,
contento.
like going to work happy,
afrontar las dificultades de la vida con otra
like dealing with the difficulties of
modo.
life in a different way,
capacidad de dar significado a las cosas
with the
que los
ability
demás
to
se
give
sueñan.
meaning to things
Solo
that
así,
others just dream of.
solo esta vida nueva
Only this
podrá
new life
revolucionar estructuras
can really revolutionize structures,
y todo
relationships,
lo que nos encontremos.
and everything that we find, that we encounter.
Es testigo
Pope Francis is a
de
witness to this,
esta belleza
to this beauty,
desarmada.
this disarming
Vaya
beauty,
donde vaya,
disarm beauty.
cualquiera que sea la persona con la que se encuentra, no
Whomever
hace
you
otra cosa
find,
que testimoniarnos esto.
he
Una
doesn't do
presencia
anything
tan
except
atractiva
testify
que
this,
hace
testify
nacer
to
en
us,
todos el deseo de vivir como él.
and to elicit
eso el
from others the
cristianismo ha
desire to
comenzado,
live the faith like he does.
Como veíamos al principio, por este asombro, es la cosa más humana.
And so we begin with this
Comenzó
astonishment, this amazement, like with Casals,
Encontrando la suite de Bach, o con
in
Albacete, con
the
todos
Bach
sus
suite,
amigos,
or Albacete
con
getting
nosotros,
together with his friends,
encontrando
or
a las
us
personas más significativas de la vida.
being the
Por
most
eso,
important people in life,
Nosotros
in our lives.
solo podemos comunicarlo del mismo modo
We can only
con el
communicate
que
this in the same way
esta realidad se
with
comunica.
which this truth was
El
communicated
Papa
to us.
Francisco
Pope Francis
ha identificado perfectamente la cuestión
perfectly identified the question,
diciendo, frente a la
Saying,
extraña anestesia que afecta al hombre de hoy, ante el sopor
he
de la
said,
vida,
in
¿qué
front of
puede
this strange
despertar la conciencia?
anesthesia that affects man today, in front of the
Este es
drowsiness
el
of life,
punto
how can our awareness
final de mi
reawaken?
¿Tiene algo que decir el cristianismo a la humanidad de hoy?
And this is the final point
Era
of
una
my
pregunta que
presentation
se
tonight.
hacía
Does Christianity
ya
have
hace
something to
años
say to today's
Siglo
humanity?
Dostoyevsky, un hombre culto de nuestros días.
Can a cult of
¿Puede creer realmente en Jesucristo?
I repeat the great phrase
Esta
of
frase de
Dostoevsky,
identifica el
a learned
desafío
person of
delante del
our
cual
days,
está
can he
la fe
truly
cristiana.
believe in the divinity of
No
the
es una
Son of
pregunta
God, Jesus
aséptica.
Christ?
Ni atemorizada.
This isn't a question that's skeptical
pregunta
or frightened.
Es una
This
una
question
oportunidad
is
única.
is a
Para la
unique
Iglesia
opportunity for the church
Se abre un camino fascinante.
to
Escribía
enter
el Papa
a
Francisco al
fascinating
meeting de
path,
Rimini del
as the
2015.
Pope, as Pope Francis said
Cuando
to the
los
meeting in
hombres se
Rimini in
afanan en la vida sin
2015.
el coraje, la fuerza
When
o la
men
seriedad
busy
necesaria
themselves
para
in
expresar
life
las
without
preguntas
courage
difíciles.
or strength
Se
or
trata,
the
por
necessary
tanto,
seriousness in
de
order
una gran
to
ocasión
express the decisive
para el
questions,
cristianismo demostrar
it is a great
su
occasion for
diferencia frente a los
Christianity
nuevos desafíos.
to demonstrate its difference in
¿Será
front
capaz
of
de
the new
convertirse en una
challenges.
propuesta
Will this be able to
suficientemente
become
fascinante
a proposal that is
como para atraer
sufficiently
la libertad
fascinating
cansada de los hombres y de las
so as
mujeres de
to
hoy,
attract
como
the
fue la
freedom
propuesta
of
de
the men and
Albacete
women of
para
today,
sus amigos laicos?
as Albacete did with his friends?
¿Cómo es posible?
How is it
Solo será
possible?
posible
It will only be
si el
possible
anuncio
if the
se realiza
proclamation
a través
comes
de la
about
experiencia de
through
la
the
belleza.
experience of beauty.
De hecho,
In
la
fact,
belleza,
beauty,
por su propia
because of
naturaleza,
its own nature,
ejerce un atractivo
exercises an
que es capaz de mover
attractiveness,
la razón y la
that is
libertad
capable
sin
of moving
constricciones de ningún tipo.
freedom and
¿Cuál
reason
es el
without
modo
any sort of
en el que el hombre
force?
descubre su verdad y la verdad de sí? Se preguntaba
How is
en
it
una
possible
ocasión
for man to discover the truth
El
of
hombre
himself?
reconoce la verdad de sí mismo
As Don Giussani used to say,
al experimentar la belleza,
people recognize the truth of themselves through the experience of beauty,
al
through
percibir el
experiencing
atractivo
the zest for
que la
life
verdad
and
suscita,
correspondence,
un atractivo y una
perceiving the
correspondencia
attractiveness
totales,
that the
no en
truth brings
sentido
about,
cuantitativo,
an attractiveness
sino
and a
cualitativo.
correspondence that are
La
complete,
verdad, la belleza de la
not in a
verdad
quantitative
es lo que
sense,
lleva a decir,
but the qualitative
es
sense.
verdad, cuando sucede.
Beauty is
Por eso,
true when it leads me to say
nosotros
it is the truth.
Estamos delante de esta oportunidad
So, my friends,
Creemos
we are in
todavía
front of
nosotros
this opportunity.
como cristianos
Do
en
we-
la capacidad que tiene la fe
do we
que hemos
believe
recibido de provocar
In the
este
capacity that faith
atractivo en
has
aquellos
to
que
provoke in others the
encontramos
attraction
en el camino de la vida
that we have
y en la
found,
fascinación
the
de la
fascination that
belleza
we have found
desarmada de la
for
fe.
beauty, the beauty of the
Esta
faith.
pregunta me ha hecho pensar
This question made me
porque la fe
think, because faith,
cristiana
because the
no es
Christian
otra
faith
cosa que la fe en
is
esta
nothing
belleza
more
desarmada.
than
Porque Dios,
the faith in this
cuando
disarming
quiso ayudar a
beauty,
los hombres
because
a
when
encontrar su camino
when
hacia sí mismo,
God decided to
para
help
encontrar
people find
el
themselves,
camino
find the
que pudiera
path
hacer
to
la vida
themselves,
digna de ser vivida
to
y
make
cambiar
life
la sociedad,
worth being
envió a
lived,
su Hijo despojándolo
He sent
de
his
cualquier
son
poder y poniendo delante solo su figura desarmada.
without any power,
Esto es
only his
precisamente la
unarmed
intención
self.
que subyace en
And
bajo
this-
el título La belleza desarmada.
And this is
Porque
the
la
underlying
belleza
theme in the title,
es el
Disarming
resplandor de la
Beauty,
verdad, decía
because
Santo
this
Tomás.
beauty of the
Por
truth
eso no necesita de ninguna otra
needs
arma
no
más
other weapon
que de su atractivo
than
íntimo
its own
para
attractiveness
fascinarnos.
to
Por eso
fascinate
el único
us.
acceso a la verdad,
For that
es
reason,
su
the
atractivo.
only access
el
to truth
testimonio,
is through the
es la
attraction,
encarnación de esta belleza, de
the
esta novedad de
witness,
la
the
vida,
incarnation of this
única
beauty,
capaz de
of this
despertar
truth of life,
la razón y la libertad.
that make
Cuando la
reason
gente se encuentra con
and
una
freedom
propuesta del
awaken.
cristianismo así,
When people
Las
find themselves in
reacciones
front of a Christian
son
proposal like
entusiastas.
this, these are the
Recuerdo
type of
una
reactions they have.
periodista
A very
escritora
well-known
catalana
journalist
que
and writer
escribió
from Catalunya
en La Vanguardia un comentario
wrote in
después
a
del
very
encuentro
important
que
paper
tuvimos en
in
Barcelona.
Catalunya,
Importó
La
poco,
Vanguardia, a comment
Escribía
which she wrote
que en
after
este
meeting me
diálogo entre los dos uno fuera creyente
in
y la otra
Barcelona. She said,
descreída, no creyente.
it didn't matter
Porque el
whether one of
diálogo
us
se
was a
estableció
believer
en el
or
marco
the
de
other
dos
was a
principios
non-believer, because the
fundamentales,
dialogue that was
la
established
libertad
was within the framework of
individual y
two
el respeto al
fundamental
prójimo.
principles, and according to
así fue
Carrón, principles
desde las
that are
dos orillas
found,
de la
that are the
pulsión
basis of
espiritual, la de la
Christianity.
fe y de la duda racionalista,
Individual
fuimos
freedom
desgranando los
and respect
nudos
for the other.
de la madeja de este
And
tiempo
thus way,
tan
and in this
confuso
way,
y tan desconcertante.
from the edges of
Me
the
han expuesto la
spiritual
belleza
impulse
desarmada de esa fe cristiana que
from
se
the two
presenta
opposite sides of the spiritual
a los
impulse,
otros
that of
desnuda
religious
de
faith
atributos,
and of rationalist
sin
doubt,
escudos, sin
we
ambiciones,
unraveled
con el único
the
propósito
knots
de
of this
servir
time, this
a la
convulsed
humanidad.
time in which we're living, this uncertain
es
time in which we're
que
living.
nosotros
Julián
hemos recibido
exposed the
para
disarming
todos.
beauty
Me
of
llama mucho
Christian
la
faith
atención
that is
que esta
presented
periodista,
to others without
dijera,
tributes, without shielding
"Vosotros,
itself, without
cristianos, tenéis que
ambitions,
salir del
with the
armario
only hope
para
of serving
poder poner
humanity."
delante de todos
And in
vuestra
this
luz,
friendly back
porque
and forth
nosotros que
between
no
us,
creemos,
I personally
no podemos
responded
vivir
that to
sin
me,
vuestra luz.
this
La luz que
faith
se os
was
ha dado para
strange,
todos.
was foreign to me,
Es lo que me decía
but it
un
was
científico
luminous.
famoso,
But what
dice, "Este
believers
es el
achieved
tipo de
was
propuesta
luminous.
que a mí me hubiera gustado haber
In fact, she
encontrado
said,
cuando yo perdí la fe con 16 años.
this is the type of
Por
proposal
eso,
I would have loved to encounter when I
Tantas
lost the
personas
faith at
como estas
16
están
years old.
esperando que nosotros podamos
So
testimoniar
people are
esta
waiting,
fe
are expecting for
que
us to witness to the
hemos
faith
recibido gratuitamente,
in the way that
no
we've
solo para
received it
nosotros,
freely.
sino para todos los que nos encontremos en el camino de la vida.
Not just for us, but for all of those whom we will meet along our path. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father Carrón. I know now I have the privilege, dear friends, of inviting to the stage Father José Medina, the National Coordinator of Communion and Liberation in the U.S., who will ask few questions to Father Carrón.
I didn't get an applause.
¿Qué tenemos que añadir ya?
Thank you, Mario. I think there is not much to add, Julián. But I wanted
I
to
agree
ask,
with you.
I wanted to ask a couple of things. We've been on the road. We've been on the road since Sunday. And I can say that I have witnessed firsthand the things you were speaking about at the very end. We've met people with whom this dialogue was a real event. I was very struck in particular yesterday, the day before yesterday, we were in St. Thomas University in Houston, and after the round table, one of the administrators came to me and said, you know, in St. Thomas we do a lot of these events. We had, at the round table with you, there was a man who happened to be a Muslim, 2 people who happened to be Baptist, and a Catholic. And he was saying, there are so many of these moments that we have at St. Thomas University of religious dialogue, inter-religious dialogue. But they usually tend to be moments in which one person says, this is how I think, the next person says, this is how I think, the other person says the same. And instead, he was saying, tonight what I saw was 5 men talking. 5 men talking as men. And I think these moments like this I saw during these last few days, moments in which something happened, and it happens because somehow the people participating spoiled themselves from the idea that they had, and they enter into a sincere dialogue. The other side that I saw also was always a fascination with what you were saying, especially when you were talking about the event. But in some of the people that were contributing, I also perceived this yes, but the event is not enough. Because there are so many things, there are so many problems in life, this is not enough, no? Or we need to come up with at least agreed on a common language, or at least in some basic moral principles. At least, so like, as if there are these 2 paradoxic, two moments that I saw during these days. The fascinating phase of that event that moves to a man to say to you, you are a barbarian after my own heart. And to, yes, it is beautiful, but we cannot renounce to everything. So with this little bit of a long introduction to this question, I wanted to ask you to tell us what is your personal experience of these days on the road. Because you have chosen to actually do this tour, as you said in the talk tonight, as moments of dialogue, not to tell you what the book says. And I also wanted to hear from you, so like if you notice the same thing that I noticed, from that yes and small but.
Thank you, Vic. This is the reason because I started this evening focusing in the event that happened in Casal, that the event who happened in Albacete. Because when they had to identify what is the important key to understanding what are the development of the whole thing, they started to identify this particular event suddenly, said before Casal, suddenly. It was unpredictable. Something new that happens but that changes everything. Like Albacete, the fact that they were invited, that he was invited to this relationship with people who were so far away from their own mentality. But it was, again, unpredictable. It was a surprise for him. But it was the starting point of a process, we can say, with the words of Pope Francis. And this is what is difficult to convey to others, the crucial importance of this event. Because all of the rest is the development of this event. But without this event, it's impossible to understand anything. For this reason, in one of these dialogues at the Notre Dame University, I insisted in a human experience that everybody has. And it's impossible to reduce only to a speech or to a doctrine or to a ethics. That is falling in love. When we understand what is the nature of falling in love, we immediately recognize that it's impossible that a series of lessons about love can produce the event of falling in love. Because it's so self-evident that nobody thinks that this could happen only after lesson. Otherwise, everybody who is alone would attend this lesson. No? All of the people who are looking for somebody to be loved, now, this course would be an enormous success. There are no courses that can be solved for this, for solve the question of loneliness. Or that after have the good theory, I can produce the event of falling in love, doctrine or ethics. But when we say that Christianity is an event, we at the end think that this is a doctrine. If we will repeat the doctrine, we can produce the event. Or I can produce the event with my performance, or in my attempt of being coherent. But it's impossible. For this reason, the only way in which an event can be produced is when the event happens again. It's impossible. For this, when this event doesn't happen, it's impossible. But Christianity, first of all, is an event. Before whatever other consequences or development, it is an event. And only can be happens as an event. And this is really difficult because a doctrine we can manage the doctrine, we can manage the ethic, we have the set of rules, we can learn a book. But with the example of falling in love, it's impossible that anybody can think that reading a book can produce the event. Christianity is the same. And it's difficult to pass, to convey this awareness of the nature of Christianity. But when happened, as happened these days in some moments in our tour, like in Houston last day, it's obvious for everybody because everybody recognizes what is happening before them. And it's easy. Like, it's easy to recognize when somebody is falling in love. It's self-evident, even for others who are like a spectator of this event. All of them immediately recognize what is happening. Your face is different. Have you fallen in love? Is that the question? Immediately, they don't know anything about what. Only they recognize in her face when she arrives to work, that something has happened. This is obvious. And this is one of the most beautiful things, because for this reason, every moment of this dialogue is an event. It's new. It cannot be repeated, no? Because you can have some draft for some particular occasion, but after the first moment in which I made the first presentation, the draft is useless, because every moment is a possibility of meeting people, of encountering the real wound of the person you are talking with. And this is amazing, because it's the possibility of became friend, became companion for this journey along the way of the life. And this is what is more fascinating of this book, not the book of himself, but the possibility of entering in dialogue with people and meeting them in his own, or their own particular situations, struggles, questions.
And the one thing that I found very striking also is that the people who were most moved during these days that we met were people that then, during the dialogues, were actually talking about their own personal experience. Meaning, I'm thinking about Ernest Morel in Notre Dame, saying like, there are moments in which I read this book and I went downstairs running to tell my wife or my children.
Tell us this, recount this episode, because this is amazing that somebody can read a book, and when he discovers something, he has to stop and to share this with somebody. This is something that's happened. How many times we can tell to others some kind of experience like that?
And the same thing in when we were in St. Thomas University in Houston, how we had asked the speakers to prepare some questions, and surprisingly enough, the questions were personal questions, as if like the book had been more a provocation to themselves than they were not questions about in an unscripted ways. We didn't tell them prepare this type of question, but it surprised me that before the book, Disarming Beauty, some people reacted personally. Mm-hmm. The people that were most moved by it. Mm-hmm. There is one moment, and I want to ask you this question also, because it relates to what you said tonight. You spoke a lot about freedom. And in the conversation we had in Denver, at some point you made this very strong statement that, in a sense, polarized the conversation, saying that if I am not, in speaking about freedom and speaking about the event, you said that if the ultimate judge of my experience is not I, then I have no dignity. And I relate that very much to something that you said also tonight, that you want to invite people to begin a road, a journey, not to give them, you were mentioning at the very beginning of the talk, I already had the answers. I needed to walk the road, and relate this very much to freedom. So I wanted you to comment a little bit on this aspect here.
I think it's one of the most beautiful things that had happened in my life, because I became enthusiastic of communion and liberation because of this proposal. Because I went to the seminary when I was 10 years old, and I have received all my for religious education. And I studied theology and arrived to the PhD degree. So the contents, more or less, no, were mine in somehow. At least as a content. But it was my own experience which made me recognize that something that didn't work. Because in my experience, there was some question that I recognized that weren't solved at all. And in this moment, I met Father Giussani. And he offered me a method that was experience, no? In which he describes experience as a particular confrontation, a validation, no? Of every kind of thing that happens in my life. If something corresponds to my more intimate desire, or something doesn't apply to this desire. And this is crucial to understanding what is the way in which I could little by little rediscover in my own experience the content of theology, of Christianity that I have received in the seminary and in my studies, theological studies. Because only if we can do a journey in which we can discover what is the meaning of everything for our life, Christianity can be interesting. Otherwise, it's a repetition of doctrines or ethics that are not able to answer. There is no capacity of answering to our wounds. Instead, these tools that Giussani puts in my hands, experience, to judge everything happening in my life in this comparison with my heart, my exigencies. It was the possibility of understanding in a new way all the newness of Christianity. For this reason, I have learned this from my experience. And I try to offer everybody the possibility of starting a journey like I've made myself. Because otherwise, only the repetition of some truth, even if it is true, it's not something false, it's not possible that this truth became mine, that I can understand what is the meaning of this truth to which I adhere without rediscovering this truth in my own experience. Because God, to make us understand what is the most important thing in life, instead of an explanation, He made them happen in our life. Instead of offering a lesson about love, we arrive to the world in a family in which we can experience this love. Instead of a lesson about falling in love, He make happen that I become in love with somebody. Because only the event can introduce us to an understanding of the content of love, of the content of justice, of the content of mercy, of the content of pardon, everything. The most important thing is life can be understood only through experience. After this experience, I was always grateful to Don Giussani, I rediscovered that what is the reason because Giussani offered this. Because he started to face in the 50s of the last century the same problem that we have now facing. In Milan, in the last century, it was impossible that somebody can be born there without belonging to the church. They were everybody baptized, they received the Holy Communion, the confirmation, they belonged to the church. They were immersed in the church. But when Giussani met him in the high school, most of them have abandoned the church. What's happened? It was the question. What has happened that all this kind of introduction to Christian life didn't work at all? And he started a new method. Instead of repeating the doctrine that they already know, he started to provoke their experience, to make them understand what was the relevance of Christian faith for life. Because without recognizing what is the relevance of faith for life, it would be useless to convince them of the mistake they had made, abandon the church. And only when some of them, many of them, started to rediscover faith, they were constrained in somehow, no, to reopen the question that they have closed in the relationship with Christian faith. And in that moment, some of people in Milan accused Don Giussani that he insisted too much in experience instead of doctrine. And for this reason, the Cardinal of Milan asked him to deep more what is the concept of experience. And he tried to persuade the Cardinal that without this experience, the boys of the high school couldn't understand what is the meaning of Christianity. Because we need to imagine when the Christianity started, that God decided to send his Son. How can Christ can introduce others to Christian life? With a speech, with ethics, only an event. Only when they were struck, because they didn't see anything like that before. They were so moved that they started to follow him. But there was something that happened before them. And in every gesture, the disciples were displaced because the newness, it was so far away from their own experience that only if they see what was the difference, they couldn't understand. They could understand what is about Christianity. Only it became visible. All the liturgy of Christmas time is this paradox. What was invisible has become visible. This is what Henri de Libat said. What was visible in a moment became invisible again, unreal. This is what is happening now. It's the contrary. Only if this became visible, we can understand what it's about, because we think that all of us know what Christianity is about. Everybody has his own idea, but many of them are only reduction of these ideas. Even Kant thought that he was update about Christianity, and because he adhered to the gospel in somehow. But he has reduced Christianity to ethics and doctrine. And when we think many times about Christianity, it's only this reduction, as many of the Pope recently has remembered and recalled. For this, without this kind of experience, it's impossible that people can be introduced to Christianity today.
I just wanted to close with a final question. Something that I also notice in these days, traveling with you and the conversations that I witnessed, is that everyone, and I would say everyone without exception, was enthralled in the conversation and interested. And I was mentioning before there was a yes, but. But there were moments in which it's very easy to actually get out of this logic of the event, out of the logic of experience, as if what you are saying right now, or what you've been saying during these days, works for the little things, or works for my personal spiritual relationship with God, but doesn't have the power, the capacity to solve the world's problems. You just came from the United Nations, where you had a conversation sponsored by the Holy See, and with Dr. Amitai Etzioni and with the Nuncio, and it was a beautiful conversation. It's also very easy to see how from something that is, I'm thinking about what the Greeks said to St. Paul. What you say is very interesting, but right now we have very serious problems to deal with, which are real problems. I mean, we are persecution, and so I guess to close even more at a personal level, so like you seem to be extremely confident in the fact that it is this way, the way in which world, our society can find peace, can find justice, can find dialogue. Not only every person, that we can find, that we don't need anything before this experience here. So, and I noticed, as if in many comments, I noticed it also when you were in Notre Dame, I noticed it also, so like this almost fearless love of freedom. But even more than fearless love of man's freedom, this fearless certainty that Christ is seeking man, and that if man is open, it will be grasped, it will be embraced. So I wanted you to ask, to tell me a little bit briefly, to close, where do you find the certainty, or what is this certainty rooted in, that allows you to go to places and say, you know, that the solution to every problem, without a but, without a limit, is in doing this, living by the event, following your experience, risking your freedom, that, as Marlon Hall said yesterday, as if the safest thing we can really do today is to risk everything. Whereas for us, the riskiest thing is not to be safe, no?
For two reasons. One reason is that what they are offering, no, as solution, because this is what Christianity proposes, is too weak, too unbelievable, no, to be effective, is what they are trying to defend, is what is demonstrated as a failure. And this is what we don't realize. We think that the problem is to change the culture, to change the ethics, to change
The language.
to change that. But all this enormous monument that was enlightenment is what is collapsing before us. But we don't want to understand that. Because we have had all the legislation, no, sustaining the whole thing according to Christian values, to defending life, or defending marriage, or defending everything. It seems that this is more crucial to change the world. But that is the realization of Kant mentality, the Enlightenment mentality, is what is collapsing before us. But we don't understand, and we try to repeat what has been so a failure. It's like if we don't understand, we don't have a real judgment, a real experience of what is happening. Because it's this lack of link between the origin of this doctrine, of this ethic, from the origin, this break that has happened in a moment in history, is what has taken us to this particular situation. So, the alternative of this, what is? That the only way that these values or these common convictions can happen again like a visible thing, like a real thing, is the only way in which they were emerged, that is linked to a particular history. And this is the real fight that we are doing now. The fight between this common mentality, this enlightenment mentality, that all is possible according to our energy, with our intelligence, with our performances, because the event, the encounter, is so fragile that it's impossible that this can change anything. And this is what is collapsing before us. The real objection is not to my courage to say this thing. The real objection is to the design of God. Because nobody could have thought that to change the world, who here would have started choosing a man like Abraham. To change the world, God decided to start choosing a man It seems absolutely crazy. Because when we trying to think what we have in mind to change the world, we think to have power, to have means, to have tools, to have instruments to change the world. God has made an enormous mistake. I'm sorry. And we are convinced that we are more intelligent than God. And this is what is the fight today, between this mentality, our intelligence, and God decide. And we have to decide. And to verify in experience what is more capable of changing the things in a personal level, in a historical level. Because we have seen at the historical level what is the result in the Enlightenment project. Everything is collapsing. And now we have to choose again. To repeat the same failure is only to the nihilism of the future, or to start everyone in his own experience showing that the only way is that we need somebody else who can fascinate our life to engage our freedom and to reawaken our person in such a way that we can offer the other a possibility of living life, not in the future, now, tomorrow morning, to go to the world in a different way. Because this is the only way in which a new life starts to happen. Not an utopia in the future. We don't know when, we don't know when, but now, when I meet the answer to my heart, that is only Christ. Thank you.
Thank you, Julián.
Thank you, Father Medina. Again, Father Carrón, thank you for your beautiful insights. Thanks to all of you in the audience for your presence and enthusiasm tonight. Be sure to visit the Crossroad website soon for a video transcript of tonight's Albacete lecture. At the exit, you will find a collection of Monsignor Albacete's presentation at Crossroad Advisory Board meetings, as well as a booklet featuring the text of 4 talks he gave at Columbia University. I also have the pleasure tonight to announce the launch of the Albacete Forum to honor and to celebrate the life and work of Monsignor Albacete. The forum will build up a digital archive of Monsignor Lorenzo's writing, some of which will be published in book form. The forum will also support and nurture the presence of Hispanics in the United States, of Hispanic presence in the church through scholarships, grants, and other initiatives. Finally, the forum will promote dialogue and collaboration across a full range of professional and academic disciplines among all people committed to the search for truth and beauty. At the end, it is not too early to mark your calendars for the next New York encounter on January 12 to the 14th of 2018, which is just around the corner. Entitled this year, the New York